All right, so we're trying a little thing with Microsoft Translator. If you've got that or don't have that, it translates into whatever language you want it to. So I'm probably speaking 15 languages right now, which is pretty funny because I don't speak but one, and that one not very well. What I like to think about the international church is that it used to be like 20, 30, 40 years ago, Roy, it was described as a parade, and that people are just kind of passing through. And it served in a lot of ways for Americans or English-speaking countries, military or corporations to come and have a place away from home, an oasis, so to speak. And all that may still be true. But what I like about the international church in our day is that it's not a home away from home, but it's a home nearer home. And what I mean by that is it's heavenly. It's heavenly. As I look around, we could call out whether it's Latvia, the Philippines, whether it's Ukraine or wherever. We are looking at Revelation 7 coming together. It's almost like already but not yet. That heaven is not here yet, but it has begun. And we see it more clearly, I think, than in my home church, where we're all pretty much vanilla. But here we've got a diversity that comes together under the umbrella of Christ in unity. In unity. And though the days may be evil, though we may be stricken with different health issues, different financial problems, different whatever on the occasion, that ultimately God is good. And that, as C.S. Lewis says, maybe it's not that the world should just be seen as a bad place. It may be that we should see ourselves as destined, as called, as made, as purposed for somewhere better. And so as we sit here today, enjoy what we have as a look to the future, really, of where we're going. But we're going to leave all the pain and all the sorrow and all the sadness and all the war behind. But today we can be glad in the peace that God has given us. We're going to finish out, I think, Ecclesiastes today, and it's right along that topic. That chapter 11 and chapter 12 really go together, and the flow of it is more along, chapter 11 is more along the lines of live boldly, live adventurously, live today as a life before God. And then chapter 12 is going to come back to the beginning of where it all started, that it's all vanity, ultimately, unless it's put into the perspective of God. So let's read. We're going to read through the entire 2 chapters, and then we'll come back and look at them. I don't think they're going to take too long today. That's famous last words of every preacher everywhere. So here we go. Chapter 11. Is that right? Yeah. Okay. Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not what disaster may happen on earth. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. He who observes the wind will not sow, and he who regards the clouds will not reap. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. In the morning you sow your seed, and at evening withhold not your hand, for you do not know which will prosper, this or that, or whether both alike will be good. Light is sweet, am I there? Light is sweet, and it is pleasant for the eyes to see the sun. So if a person lives many years, let him rejoice in them. But let him remember that the days of darkness will be many. All that comes is vanity. Let me see. There we go. Then we move on. I think I've lost a slide somewhere. But remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened and the clouds return after rain. In the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low, they are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms and grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners go into the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher, all is vanity. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly wrote the words of truth. The words of the wise are goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. They are given by one shepherd, my son. Beware of anything beyond these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is weariness of the flesh. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. And thus saith the word of God. All right, so there's a lot there. Now remember, from the beginning, we have talked about how Ecclesiastes is a book written by Solomon, King Solomon. And he has gone out to experience life under the sun, which means as a human would see things. It's not in the perspective of someone who's in belief as much as the perspective of humanity at large. And so he's going to repeat that phrase, under the sun, in these 12 chapters a bunch of times, just to tell you this is a perspective. Occasionally, as we've seen, he pokes his head above the sun, and he gives us the bigger, divine, godly perspective. And that is the purpose of this book, is to get us from under the sun to living with God. And he's going to give you his purpose statement as we read in chapter 12. The other thing is that he shares this phrase, vanity of vanities. And it's an aspirant in the original. It's chavel, chavel. And it's meant to be heard that way because it's just a breath. It's smoke. It's vapor. It's something that doesn't last very long. And so the whole illustration of the book is life is passing. That death is sure. But it's best if that life is lived in an understanding of who you are and what you were made for. Chapter 11 specifically takes us to the end, really, and it's sometimes things just seem like they don't matter. It seems like what you do that is good goes unnoticed. It seems like your little acts, your prayers, your obedience to the Lord, it just doesn't seem to work out. It just is hard sometimes. That our actions don't seem to amount to anything good. That our prayers, are they being answered? And it can cause us to try a couple things. And you see the church make mistakes and do this. It tries to create. It tries to create an experience. It tries to create an emotion or something to make it seem like something is happening when in reality we're just kind of putting on the smile and putting on the cheers and doing this. I'm not saying emotion is bad, but emotion by itself without substance, that's not what we're about. The other thing it can cause us to do is to be cautious and less inclined to follow, less inclined to obey, less inclined to really care, because really, does God get it? Does he know I'm here? Is he involved? So we go from trying to create our own sense of reality to denying it and just giving in, instead of coming back to this place of balance where we are to know that even though we don't see it in the present, that over time we see our prayers answered. Over time we see God get us to where we need to be. In his timing, in chapter 3, there's a time for everything. So Solomon's going to encourage his people at the end of this book not to base your life on what you see or what you feel, not to give in and give up, but to fully live by faith. That what you cannot see today is not necessarily what you will see tomorrow. When we look around this room, we get a glimpse of people and nations coming together in a way that it's going to see. Right now, we read the headlines and there's war, there's conflict, there's famine, there's earthquakes, there's all kinds of things going on, and it just seems like it isn't going the way it should. But God has told us it's going to get worse before it gets better. Why are we expecting less? God has told us that it's going to get really good in the end. Hold on. Hold on. But when you're holding on, it's not holding on as just, we always say, are you surviving? And I think most of Christianity is just surviving. They've got that visa in their pocket of salvation. They know that they're headed somewhere. But man, let's just try not to sin too big, and let's just try to get there faithfully to the end. And that's just not the picture the Bible gives us. The picture the Bible gives us is to go out there and to courageously, boldly live by faith, even though you don't see it today, to believe and trust and know that the tomorrow is coming. Life is an adventure to be embraced in the will of the Lord. In the will of the Lord. And I think that's, Elizabeth Elliot said it. She goes, you're better anywhere in the will of the Lord in the world than you are anywhere in the world out of the will of the Lord. So whether it's a dangerous place or a safe place, the issue is not danger or safe, but are we in his will? Chapter 11 starts off with, cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Give a portion to 7 or even to 8, for you know not where disaster may happen on earth. Some people take these verses as philanthropy, like the book of Nehemiah tells them to eat the fat, drink the wine, send portions to those who have none. And I think that's a biblical way to live, is that we give from our abundance, that we see ourselves as a overflowing cup and that we overflow into others. Instead of seeing ourselves always as half empty, when people are down and discouraged and I'm counseling, I usually tell them what they don't expect. I say, okay, go find someone to help. Because as you find that you have something to offer, something to give, you realize that your cup's not as half empty as you might think. You're just focusing on the one thing or the few things or the something, person, whatever, that you don't have. And in reality, God's got a plan within that. And you just need to keep walking faithfully. Go serve somebody. Go give to somebody. Go walk in faith that you actually have been purposed to do something, think Great Commission, that he's told us to do. So philanthropy could be, or industry here, if you want to go business, that to invest your resources. And I like this better than the philanthropic, I don't know. I like this way better. That you are to invest your resources. As with a business, to look ahead to the future, you diversify those investments. You pray for this, you give to this ministry, you serve here, you spread yourself thin. And now everyone's going, oh, so that's why you live the life you live. No, it wasn't meant to be that way, not that thin. But you are to give into different things, not knowing that sharing my faith with this neighbor or sharing my faith with this person or teaching this study, where that's going to lead. But I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to walk forward in sharing and discipling and making people know about my Lord. I'm not the one in charge of who's going to respond and who's not. And the surprise of the investment in return is, I think, what's going on here. If the clouds are full of rain, they empty themselves on the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or to the north, in the place where the tree falls, there it will lie. It's you don't know. You don't know. One of my favorite B movies, a guy actually who went to North Texas, Buckaroo Banzai, and the Eighth Dimension of Doom. It's a B movie, okay? But they have this one line, and it says, no matter where you go, there you are. And it's like, but that's what this is. It's like, where the tree falls, that's where it lies. Yeah, that there are things that are unexplainable sometimes, but they are. great. If your job is research and stuff like that, go figure out why it fell that way. That's fine. But for the rest of us, it's there. I'm going to cast my bread upon the waters, and I'm going to hope. Because what Isaiah says, the word goes out and it will not come back void. I preach from one book on Sundays because verses like that. It promises. I could care less if you get my illustrations, if you like my jokes, if you make fun of the way I dress. Ukrainian colors today, by the way. I don't care. But if you get the word, if I can hand you that, then everything's good from my perspective. I'm just to pass out the food. You're to consume it. But then let God work. He who observes the wind will not sow. In other words, if you're just standing around watching the wind blow, you got to get engaged. He who regards the clouds, think of a guy laying on the back, watching the clouds go by while it's time to put plants into the ground or harvest, he's not going to reap. Without investing, I can tell you what the end is. That's predictable. If you don't go forth, you won't see your faith grow and you won't see your faith become fruitful. That is for sure. But when you do, that's when it gets a little edgy. That's when faith becomes a little bit fun. That's when watching God becomes not a spectator sport, but a participant. You're in there. As you do not know the way the Spirit comes, there we go, comes to the bones in the womb of a woman with child, so you do not know the work of God who makes everything. Spirit and wind are the same word throughout both the Old and the New Testament. And this spirit or this wind comes to the bones of the woman, and we don't know exactly how. I mean, we've figured it out. I've got my master's in physiology. I can tell you how certain things come together. But if you keep pushing me, and how did that part come? And where did this come from? And where, at some point, my response is, God knows. God knows. In the next generation, they may find out a little bit more of what God knows. Science was originally created to show the design of the Creator. It wasn't meant to be in battle, but to display a greatness. But we're never going to get to the bottom of it. We're never going to know everything that God's knows. We do not become infinite in our intellect. In the morning sow your seed, at the evening withhold not your hand. You don't know. You don't know which one is going to bring forth fruit. Morning is natural. Everybody gets up. Well, us morning people, you get up and you get to work. And you do your job. But usually in the evening, it's kick back, sit down, turn off, turn out, and turn in, But he's saying, do them both. If you get a chance to do it where he said 7 before or the 8th, go the extra mile. For you do not know which will prosper. Live boldly for the kingdom. This or that, or whether both alike will be good. Maybe, you'll get something. There's a famous guy, I'm going to misstate it. You can correct me, Maureen, but Flavel. Flavel preached in the 1800s somewhere, and he had this one guy that eventually moved to the States. And he had heard Flavel preach when he was a young, I think under 10. And he lived to be 103, and he was out in the field doing something in the United States. And that sermon came back to him, and he bowed in the field, and he accepted Christ at 103. It was a century almost of that sermon sitting in his head, and then coming back to him. And then he lived on to be 106. I forget the guy's name. He had a really weird name. But those last 3 years, he made himself productive. Productive. And yet we don't know. Will it be the morning or the evening? He's going to transition that life is an adventure. And I can't see that back there. Am I on the right slide back there? Yes, I am. Life is an adventure, especially when you can't see. Um, Live it. But there's this thing that we fight. We fight. There's this worship of youth. We who are getting older, we eat differently, we exercise differently, we do things differently because we want to stay young. Those who are young, they look at the elderly and say, man, you're outdated and there's nothing to be heard there. We're getting on with it. But both of them are worshiping youth. And in humanity in general, we have this worship, this cult of youth. The old worship trying to maintain, the young worship ignoring the old. All right? And we're reminded that it's not bad to get old. In Psalm 91:16, it says, with long life I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. We're studying Malachi on Wednesday nights. Malachi 4, but you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. You shall go out leaping like calves from the stall. That you guys who, I woke up, Jen, I was walking down to the car and she goes, what's wrong? Because I was reaching down to my knee. I said, yeah, something's not right. I don't know what it is, but something's not right. My body is just falling apart. But one day, I'll be leaping like a calf again. Not this day. Psalm 118, this is the day that the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. That I can just be bitter about my knee falling apart, but that's normal. I've got thousands of miles on that knee, literally. What do I expect? But eventually, I'll have a different body. And we'll be at a different place. Verse 9, he turns to the youth, rejoice, O young man, in your youth. Don't despise being young. It's great. Let your heart, be careful, let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth. Okay? Walk in the ways of your heart, which almost sounds like, hey, just go be carefree, but follow the verses out. And the sight of your eyes, but know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. So it's like, follow your heart, live your dreams, go out there and be bold and courageous and find out things that the generations before you did not know, did not discover. Bring to light, bring to life new ideas. But keep it holy. Don't go into the bizarre or the atrocious. Stay within the realm that God has given. Freedom is not freedom to live any way we want. Freedom is freedom to be what you were created to be. Freedom takes discipline. It's not the 60s. I grew up on the tail end of that where you just live, love, and do whatever you want and think it's all going to work out. But if Jinya's going to play the piano because she was created to play the piano, she's going to have to sit down at some point and learn her scales. She's going to have to train her ear. She's going to have to read music. There's a discipline. There's structure in being what you were created to be, and all of humanity is like that. We have all been given a gift. We have all been called into something. Find it. And go be crazy good at it. You have freedom to be what you were created, but you're still called to holiness. 1 John, for all that is in the world, the desires of the flesh, the desires of the eyes, and pride of life is not from the Father. So don't go there. It's the one tree. Don't eat from that tree. But everything else is good for you. Trust. Trust and go. So flee youthful passions, pursue righteousness, faith, love, and peace, along with those who call on the Lord from a pure heart. My one regret probably in ministry is chasing other things for way too long. I wish I could turn back years knowing what I knew after I came to the Lord and do things a little bit differently in those days. To be more in tune with my Creator earlier than later. He ends this chapter, remove vexation from your heart and put away pain from your body. For youth and the dawn of life are vanity. Old and young rejoice. If you can remove the pain, remove the pain. Paul prayed 3 times for the thorn to be removed from his side, but God said no. I pray almost weekly for my eyesight to stabilize, because I preach from this thing so I can make the font as big as I need it to be at any given moment, because my eyes fluctuate. I pray, God, give me vision. And right now he gives me iPad, which works, all right? We don't live in denial. We don't say the pain's not there. We don't live just pleasure-seeking, trying to be out of pain and just being happy. But we get rid of the things that needlessly harm or hurt our mental or physical health. We see a lot of mental issues these days. Man, get rid of them. The very best way I know to do this, and I know you're going to say, yeah, that's what the pastor's going to say, but I promise you if you try it, is prayer. Philippians 4 says, do not be anxious about anything. Anything. So anything that makes you anxious. For example, opening up my phone and seeing on whatever social media I'm into that everyone out there is doing better than me. I mean, seriously, can everyone be that great? Or wondering about the bills, wondering about people in the church getting this or not getting this, wondering about my kids so far away. I can't do a whole lot about any of those. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God, and the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And so he ends that chapter with, remove the pain if you can, because youth and the dawn of life are vanity. And then he's going to get into his final part, and he's going to start off with really, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. So as you're removing the pain, live in peace with him. Before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. All of the teachings of chapters 1 to 11 are summed up here. Remember your Creator. Remember him in your work. Remember him in your play. Remember him in your family. Remember him in the things you do which no one sees. Remember him in the things that everybody sees. Remember him. Live a God-centered life now. Because what you do today will really, it's hard to break habits. When you get 30, 40, 50, you've done something now for 20 years at least. And I always hear, especially men, young men, yeah, I'm going to get serious. I'm going to do this for the Lord, once I get past this, or once I get there, or once I accomplish this. And if you're not doing it today, you're probably not going to do it that day either, unless there's a real catalytic moment. And God's good to bring those. But start today. Start small. Start acknowledging him in everything you do. Do not wait to decide to follow him. Evil days are coming. Enjoy him now, and you will enjoy him then. And then, I don't think it shows up in the English text too well, but verses 2 to 5 are actually a poem. And this thing isn't working. Catherine, you may have to turn my slides for me back there. So 2 to 5, it says, before the sun, I'm not sure that's the right there. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, and the strong men are bent, and the grinders cease because they are few, and those who look through the windows are dimmed, and the doors on the street are shut, when the sound of the grinding is low, and one rises up at the sound of a bird, and all the daughters of song are brought low. They are afraid also of what is high, and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails, because man is going on to his eternal home, and the mourners go about the street. It's a poem about old age. It's a poem comparing old age to a storm that day and night are covered in darkness. That as you get older, the days don't clear out. It's just always kind of stormy. You know, that this hurts, that hurts, I can't do this anymore, I can't lift that as well as I used to. That the storm starts to get, the clouds start to get more and more. When you're young, the storm clears. You go through a tough time, but then you've got a great time. But as you get older, you start to forget, you start to ache, you start to whatever, at least physically. Spiritually, that may be a different scenario depending on how you listen to verse 1. He's going to compare the elderly to a house, slowly deteriorating. The keepers that he talks about here in verse 2 or 3 are the strength, the arms of a person. And they begin to tremble, they begin to weak. The strong men are the legs, they begin to bend, they begin to give out. The grinders are the teeth, they either disappear or they cease because they're few. Those who look through the windows, the eyes are dimmed. Cataracts start taking over, or too many books, something happens, but you just quit seeing. And the doors on the street, the ears are shut. You start not hearing. The grinding is low. And one rises up at the sound of a bird. If you've ever met it's typical of an elderly to just wake up bright and early, 4 a.m., it's ready to go. You know. Mel would always tell me, let's get together, and he would give me some extreme morning hour to do that. But it's just like that. And all the daughters of song, our ability to sing, our vocal cords start to go away. And then this fear starts to come in of what is high because I can't protect myself. I'm not able to do the things I used to do. Terrors are in the way. And then the almond tree blossoms. Almond tree gives off a white blossom, but it's in the spring. And you shouldn't be gray in the spring, but if you're old, you're just gray. All right? Every time I get a haircut these days, I just laugh because as a lady shaves my hair, it's just gray falling on the hay. You know, I'm like, wow, it doesn't look gray when I look at it. It is. Because man is going to his eternal home, and the mourners are about the streets. Sitting with Mel. Pastor Mel is the guy who's influenced my life probably the most. He's 97. He's discipled me for over 30, maybe 40 years now. And I was at lunch with him, and someone asked him the other day, well, months ago now, they asked him, hey, do you live alone? He goes, no, my 71-year-old daughter lives with me. And then he paused, and he goes, you know how weird it is to say that your 71-year-old daughter lives with you? Because that means I'm really old. Like, yeah, Mel, you're old. You're old. And that's just where we're all headed. If he extends us life, we're all going to go that way. The hair's going to get gray or fall out. The teeth are going to get few or brittle. And eventually, the spirit returns to God who gave it. Growing old and facing death is one of the hardest things to do. And yet the Bible is honest about it. It doesn't try to make it light and fluffy. It just says, hey, this is what has happened. Because of the fall, this is the destiny of every man. Embrace it, but embrace it with the veracity, knowing the truth that it's going to get better, that it's good even now in this. The Bible is honest, but it's not bitter. It's not bitter. We started this section with a call to remember God. And that's important, but more importantly is to know that in those stormy days, God remembers you. That you're not forgotten. You may forget him, but he doesn't forget you. Precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of the saints. So we do not lose heart, though our outer self is wasting away, our inner self is being renewed day by day. For we know that if the tent that is our earthly home is destroyed, we have a building from God, a house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Havel, Havel. In 1:2, he starts off with Havel, Havel. In 12:8, he ends Havel. And then it's an inclusio. It's a literary term that means everything between the two ends is encompassed in this thought. Havel. Besides being wise, the preacher also taught the people knowledge. This is how he wrote: through study, through logical clarity. Studying and arranging many proverbs with great care, the preacher sought to find the words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. He wanted his people to know. The same passion I think as any pastor has is, here is the Bible, here is God's truth. Take it. Take it. The words of the wise are like goads, and like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. So goads, growing up in South Texas near the largest family ranch in the world, we had a lot of cowboys that still wore spurs on their boots. And spurs were not real sharp, but they were pointy enough that when you put them in the side of a horse, he knew that he needed to go. Even if he didn't want to go into that brush, even if he didn't want to go through that water, whatever, the goad would keep him going. Not as something to punish him, but something to motivate him to get going in the direction that was best for him. Like nails firmly fixed are the collected sayings. It's something that we nail into our brains, into our hearts, to keep us firmly fixed on the truth. They are given by one shepherd, and I think he's referring to Jesus Christ right here. My son, beware of anything beyond these, of making many books. There is no end. And much study is a weariness of the flesh. The preacher's words push us not to expect lasting satisfaction in money, pleasure, but only in the goodness of God. They steer us away from foolish rage, mocking laughter. They spur us on to patience, contentment, humility, joy. When we forget about God, the preacher prods us to remember our Creator, to come back, to return, to repent, and to revitalize life with Him. The goad in the ribs, the poke, the nails of truth. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep His commandments. Havel, Havel. Fear God. Know Him. Follow Him. Havel, Havel. Walk in His light. To love is to understand His ways and to follow, not out of a legalistic, but out of a love-motivated base. Life is vanity. Life under the sun is fleeting, but it's not the end. God will be there with us through it, and He will be there waiting at the end. For those who know Christ, this will be goodness. And for those who don't, Havel means a very different thing, that you lived in vain, and it will end in vain. And it sounds like, man, that sounds pretty narrow. And Jesus says, it is a narrow path. It sounds pretty exclusive. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. But what about all these others? Jesus says, he who does not have the Son does not have the Father. What about the person who's never heard? That's a straw man. I haven't traveled to every country in the world, but about a third of them. Places that are deep and dark and far away from a church steeple. And yet every place I've been, somehow, God has been there before me. Don't worry about the guys that you don't know about, that live on the island that doesn't exist, that have not heard because no one has told them. Worry first about you. First about you. Sometimes we don't see it happening. Sometimes we pray for our kids, my parents, our friends, for years and years and years. And then somebody knocks on their door one Wednesday night, in the case of my sister, and shares the gospel with her live-in boyfriend at the time. And he comes to Christ, reminds her of her commitment of previous years. They rejoice and move in a direction that was very different than the night before. We don't always see it. We don't always get it. Don't try to create it in false emotion. Don't try to get out of it by just walking away. Live in that tension. Havel. It's vanity. Havel. In that vanity, there is God. Walk with him.